in our campus and outside our campus to understand. We need to be aware of the barriers, some of the actions that our communicate is causing or doing. What are some of the unintended labors that we're placing on these people as humans when we're trying to include them, but we're inadvertently excluding them? So for this particular map here, still using the threshold concepts, this is just talking about ways in which, from the same three lenses that we used before, to try to help us make some changes. So I kind of just grouped it into barriers, actions, and outcomes. And this is specifically for writing programs. This is for curriculum. It's for professional development. So talking about cultural, positional, and situational identities and ideologies, we all know in all of our disciplines, we have an identity. Our discipline has an identity. Our topic, our themes have identities. But our students come in with already made up identities. So this idea of whether or not we need to shape that identity or let that identity grow and develop into what other identities, it comes into whether or not we're being what I call prescriptive legitimacy. So it's when we're encoding or inscribing ideas and ideologies based on assumptions of the identities of the writer. There is an assumption that from the research, there's an assumption that younger children don't have the cognitive ability to write in contemporary composition context. I'm gonna say one thing, #March for Our Lives. Those were young students that took it upon themselves to talk about social justice in a way that was more effective to them, that has now changed the way that we talk about it. They're talking about something that impacts their age group. They use literacy practices that were established by them. Social media was not made for adults. Social media was created and became popular through young people use. So when we think about these ideas and ideologies that we have about our children or how our young people, I think we're doing them a disservice if we're looking at them back in 1978, where I was, because it's completely different. Making these assumptions of the identities of the writer, and it signals what is valued. What is it that we value? As well as what the writer is expected to value. So not only are we saying that we value it, this is what's important to us, it should be important to you. That's a barrier, because we know that identities vary. Writers' processes, history, and identities vary. I call that impeding representation. Evaluating performance based on ascribed assumptions or identity politics recreate systemic and systematic disruptors or descriptors used to marginalize. When we're talking about the things that we're trying to communicate equitably, these impeding representations create barriers. So the things that we say and how we're assessing and how we're communicating absolutely are communicating that. We need to question the ways that we're doing that to make sure that we're being effective and that we're being clear and we're being intentional on the things that we want the students to take from our courses, what we want them to intentionally to represent when they leave Lawrence Tech. We want them to represent themselves. We want them to be leaders in the fields and in the careers that they pursue. But we also want them to feel empowered and to be honest about who they are in their identities, because it's their identities that sparks their innovation. When we're looking at cognitive activity, so we're talking about, I said assessment, discipline, values, and philosophies, when we're talking about cognitive activity. Until there is solid research that we will use in higher ed that can prove that cognitive activity is something that happens at certain times that we're actually going to use, even though we know that there's some scientific research that exists, until we start actually relying on that in higher ed, indicating that someone doesn't have a cognitive activity isn't really true. How do we know? Did we give them the stimuli that they needed to respond to the things that we wanted to see in their cognitive activity? So I call that review, reflect, and revise, challenging our values and philosophies with specificity by reviewing inequitable assessment practices and reflecting on our intrinsic or adapted disciplinary values. Because there are things that we believe, and then there are things that we've put on because of who we are and what we do in our disciplines. So we want to make sure